Say, okay.
Okay.
Today
Today.
we're working
Okay.
on a 99 Ford
Ford.
Expedition. Expedition.
Cherry.
Expedition.
Listen.
I'm gonna show you how to do brakes. Alright, first things first, we have to jack up the car, or the truck in this case.
Papa, no touch.
Don't touch.
Papa,
That works. Think it'll hold?
Yeah.
Yeah? Alright. Always use a jack stand. Say always.
Oh, there.
Let's see.
Oishi.
And here. Okay.
Okay.
First things first. So, in order to get this rotor off, we're gonna have to take the bearings off, the ones that are in here. Take those bearings off. There's an outer bearing and there's an inner bearing. Yeah, first things first. I'm only gonna show you one side, and you guys will get the idea. Alright, you're gonna need a T45. And you see that? There you go, T45 for the inner bolt, for the caliper bolt. And I got this badass wrench from Husky. This one, you turn this knob, then you can make it, it's a flex ratchet, so you flex it, and then you lock it in place. Any angle you want, lock it in place, and it stays there. You don't have to deal with the whole wobbliness that you deal with some Harbor Freight shit. Well, here's the caliper. You want to take these two bolts off. These are T45s. Let me get a lamp. Oh yeah, how's that? That looks way better, huh? Alright, so there's this bolt and there's this bolt up here. You gotta take those off to take the caliper off. I'm gonna let them loose with this ratchet. Okay. And then to speed things up a little bit, one thing about this ratchet too, it's a quick release. I love that it holds the socket and it won't come off. But boom, quick release. Okay, so I'm gonna use this Milwaukee to speed things up. Battery power tools make everything a lot quicker. So you take this nut off. Sorry, bolt. When I say nut, I mean bolt, and when I say bolt, I mean nut. So get those off of there. Then you can get this caliper out of here. Screwdriver. Put it in here, and just do this. And the pistons are going in. So now it's really loose. Now all you gotta do is take it off. There it is. Caliper's off, and don't let it hang. You gotta put it up here somewhere where it'll stay. Actually, I think this is the side that was metal to metal right here. Look at that. There's no more brake pad on this. Alright, see this? Woo! I was almost done with the rotor. Check it out. Jesus. And I talk shit about my customers. Look at that. So the rotor is supposed to be this thick. And look. I wore it down to like 1 millimeter. What the fuck? What the fuck, homie? We gotta take these two bolts off. That's gonna allow us to get this bracket off. get these out of here so you can get the bracket out. So first things first is we got to take this dust cap off. Okay, so you're gonna need yourself some pliers. Get yourself some of these pliers right here. Okay, and then just grab it and wiggle it out, just like that. Alright, now there's a cotter pin here. So the way I like to do it is I grab the cotter pin and I pull it up, and then I pry on this. I pry on the rotor, focus on the rotor as I'm squeezing the cotter pin, and I pry on that rotor and I pull the cotter pin out of there. Now this is gonna damage the cotter pin, so you're gonna need new ones. Alright, so this allows you to take this nut off. This nut should not be super tight on there, and it's not. So there's a bearing here on the outside that'll come off as soon as you take this nut off. Just pull on the rotor. Here is the bearing. Okay. Alright, so here's the bearing that came off. If you're putting new bearings, put new races also. If you're gonna reuse them, you have to repack them. Okay. Now here on the back of the rotor, there's another bearing with a seal. The way I like to get those off is I put this nut back on the spindle. Make sure it's on there like 3 or 4 threads. Then I slide my rotor over and I let it hang. When it's hanging down, I just yank the rotor off, and that nut is gonna take the bearing and the seal off, just like this. Okay, so here's the bearing, no longer in here, and here's my seal. Okay, then you can take that nut off, and you gotta clean this shit off. Make sure it's super clean. Alright, so I got all the parts laid out here, starting with the seal, the inner bearing, the outer bearing, the washer, the nut, and the castle nut. But I need a new cotter pin. Okay, so what I'm gonna do right now is clean those parts really well. I'm gonna clean the spindle really well, and then I'm gonna pack the bearings with grease. Alright, so now that we got the bearings packed and all the other parts cleaned, it's time to get the rotor and clean it up. Where's my knife? Clean it off because it's covered in oil to prevent the rotor from rusting. You can see some of that right there, right here. So we want to clean that off real good. Alright, you want to take a little bit of your grease and put it inside the race. This is just going to help lubricate the bearing a little better. Not too much, just enough to coat the race. So you take your inner bearing and just drop it into place. Then you're going to take your seal and you're just going to hammer it in. I like to put a little grease on here too, because there's a little spring inside and you don't want that spring to pop out of its place. Just go around and tap it evenly. And that's it for the inner bearing. Make sure you don't get any grease on the rotor either. That's gonna give you some brake noise. Alright, now we can put the rotor on the spindle, and then we can put the other bearing when the rotor is on there. But I'm gonna put a little grease on this race while it's out here. You don't want to put too much. You don't want to overdo this. Okay, there it is. Once you got the rotor on there, take the outer bearing, just put it in place. And take your washer, then you take your nut, and just put it on hand tight. And give it a spin. If you put it too tight, if you put the nut too tight, you're gonna feel it on the rotor. It's not gonna spin too much. So what you wanna do is you wanna get it on there tight. You wanna put your crescent wrench at 6 o'clock or anywhere close to 6 o'clock. Then you wanna back it off to 12 and then just put it at 3 o'clock. Then give the rotor a spin. It should spin freely and then you're good to go. So that's good. Take your castle nut, put it on there, and then put your cotter pin on there. Now when you put your cotter pin on here, you want to bend it so that the cotter pin wraps around the castle nut. Now you can do this by hand or you can do it with some pliers or hammer it in. That's just going to keep the nut from coming off. Then you can put your dust cap and hammer that in. Now it's time for the bracket. Alright, I'm just gonna gun these down. You gotta make sure those are tight on there, so always check them by hand. You're actually supposed to torque them down, but if you don't have a torque wrench, just use like one of these right here. So this is the brake pads that I got for it. These are Duralast from AutoZone. Supposed to be pretty good. Ah, good. They come with grease. Perfect. What I like to do is I put some grease right here on the brake pad and right here on the brake pad. This is where it's gonna slide on the caliper bracket. And I just put it there because that's where it's metal to metal contact and I don't want any noise. So just put that right there and slap it on there. You don't want too much. You don't want it to get off the brake pad and then get on your rotor. Try to keep the rotor as clean as possible. And same thing with this pad. Just put it on here. Now we gotta push the pistons back in on the caliper. So you're gonna need a tool like this. This is a caliper piston depressor. So all you do is put it in here and squeeze. And it's gonna give you room for the brake pads and the rotor to fit inside the caliper. Beautiful. You can also put a little grease on your bolts to help those sliders slide a little better. Don't put too much. You don't want to get any on the threads. And then of course double check it. There it is. So there you have it. How to do your front brakes and how to repack your bearings on a '99 Ford Expedition. That's it for this one. I'll see you guys on the next video.